We are here to listen to a great keynote speech by Susana Delgado, who is a managing director at Swift. So Susana will have a 20-minute speech, and then we can take a few questions. She will be also in the panel tomorrow, so you can also by night thinking about her speech and thinking about super cool questions. And if you don't have questions, we will not serve food, so be careful. Susana, the floor is yours.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this European Academy in Digital Finance. So I am Susana Delgado. I'm a managing director at Swift and in charge of market and business intelligence globally. And today I have the pleasure to walk you through my perspectives in cross-border payments, how the different market trends are affecting this very rapidly evolving industry, what are the different players that are emerging, and how do we see all of this affecting the different stakeholders in this industry. So in order to start, let me invite you to come in a trip back in time, and I would like you to think about 2008 as an inflection point when the financial crisis started. So before that, we're traveling backwards to before 2008. Before that, the cross-border payments market was quite straightforward. There were a few actors playing very clear roles in this ecosystem. Think about the banks that were orchestrating for cross-border payments, and they were using Swift. And let me maybe introduce you to Swift, because you may not be so familiar with it. So Swift was created 50 years ago by the banks as a cooperative to orchestrate for cross-border payments internationally. So it was enabling for connectivity as well as for the standards and the language to be used to exchange payment information with each other. And Swift is at the backbone of the financial ecosystem. We're very proud to say that we're moving the world's GDP every 3 days. So at the time, it was the banks and Swift orchestrating for cross-border payments, and there were other actors tackling all the different use cases. Think about the card schemes, which were orchestrating for cross-border payments when it comes to travel. You would travel with your credit card and pay at the merchant abroad, and that's still the case. But today there's many more options. There were the money transfer operators, as we call them, so Western Union, MoneyGram, and the likes. They were orchestrating for remittances from migrants that are sending money to their families back home, and that was a different business model based in cash in and cash out in most of the cases. And that was pretty much it. There were some outliers like PayPal that was already existing since early 2000s, and that's really a digital native kind of player for that time. Now, what happened after 2008? After the financial crisis and the world lost a little bit the credibility in financial institutions, and they were leveraging new technologies to come up with new options, and the FinTechs emerged. And in the cross-border space, you may think about FinTechs like Wise, that really came very disruptive with a very good value proposition in terms of usability, very simple to use app that anyone can order a payment within a few clicks, lowering the prices quite significantly, so very low fees was their value proposition, and instant payments in many cases. So they really disrupted what was there before. Not only the FinTechs, but think about the neobanks that also started after that year, and some of them became a bank today. Think about Revolut, so they also started from that angle of orchestrating cross-border payments. In their case, it was a specific use case for people that travel a lot, and they enable to open multi-currency accounts. So if I was traveling from Europe into, let's say, Canada, I could instantly open an account in Canadian dollar, transfer my money instantly, and paying domestically there, not having to bear the fees and the cost of FX charges. There were more players like the big techs that came into this space. So think about Google Pay, Apple Pay. You may be using them on your everyday when you're paying at merchants, domestically, but also cross-border, right? And actually, some statistics from WorldPay are reflecting the usage of these digital wallets to be up to 50% of the payments in e-commerce and up to 30% in point of sale. And they are not more than an overlay that is part of the payment, but behind it there's a real payment system that may be a card, but they are getting the information of the payment. There's more players that emerge, and let me speak about the digital money transfer operators that disrupted the incumbents, the RIA, MoneyGram, and so on. So you may think about Remitly as a good example of that, that is digital native and is coming up with a fresher product, easy to use, and getting a little bit away of the cash in and cash out, offering it more digitally, and many more. If we think about other geographies, and let me travel this time to Asia Pacific, what we see there is the phenomenon of the super apps. So in China, you may have heard about WeChat and Alipay, and actually I'm about to travel to China in 2 weeks from now, and I was told, forget about the cash, forget about the cards, they don't work there, you need to get Alipay. So I'm getting ready for that. But the same happens in South Korea with Kakao, in Bangladesh with Big Cash, you name it. There's different super apps in the different countries, and they became not only the way to pay, but also the way to find your services within the app. And if we travel to Latin America, I think we're seeing a similar case there as well. Mercado Pago is a good example of something that started as a payment method for the Mercado Libre marketplace, but more and more is also considered a super app working in different Latin American countries. More players that emerge, in this case in Africa, we may think about the mobile network operators. If you think about Africa, there's a very large population that is unbanked, and the mobile operators very early on saw the opportunity to offer them a payment method, right? An ability to hold money and pay at merchants. And that's the example of M-Pesa, Orange Money, MTN, etc. So the population in Africa got used to these payment methods as well. More things that came up after this year, of course, the cryptocurrencies. So Bitcoin is a very good example back in 2009, but then everything else that came with it, right? And even central bank digital currencies are now being explored by over 100 central banks. So we're moving into the direction of digital currencies. And the last one, maybe some new rails that emerge, and that's blockchain based. So if you have heard about Ripple created a new rail to move money thanks to the blockchain technology. So all in all, with all these examples, and they are only examples because there's many more, I just wanted to reflect the heterogeneity and the fragmentation that we have today in the payments ecosystem. And it's tackling domestic payments, but also cross-border payments in many cases. Now, what are the trends that have affected all these changes, right? Why did it all happen? I think there's 4 major macro trends that have affected that, and let me illustrate them one by one. But essentially, I'm going to be speaking about technology, customer behaviors and expectations are changing. The third one would be regulation, and the fourth is geopolitics. So let me come into the technology angle. We see that the pace of technological change is accelerating, and it will further accelerate. And there's many technologies affecting that. AI, of course, is in the spotlight of everyone this year. It affects every industry. It's not only the financial players, but every company is eager to take the benefits of AI in terms of productivity, efficiency. But when we move it into the opportunities within the payments landscape, we see it very clearly that AI can help build mechanisms for fraud detection that are more effective. So we're trying to use it to get more sophisticated in the anomaly detection, AML protection, and so on. If we think about other technologies like distributed ledger or blockchain, this is also coming with very big promises into the payment landscape. It's not only creating new rails, as I described, Ripple is one example. There's many other players or different realities that are trying to leverage blockchain for the same purpose. Let me mention one example, which is Finality. I don't know if you've heard about them, but that's made by a consortia of banks that are trying to leverage blockchain to orchestrate for payments domestically and also potentially in between different countries. They've been experimenting for different years now. Recently, they got the status of regulated by the Bank of England, and they are aiming to get the same status within the US and possibly in Europe as well. So we see this as something that is yet experimenting and learning, but potentially it can become a reality in the nearby future. We see other players that are emerging in blockchain, but let me shift into other technologies like cloud and APIs. This is something that it may sound not so new, and banks have been adopting cloud and APIs for years as part of their digital transformation journey, and they will continue doing so. I think this is the pillar to grant for always on or 24/7 operations, right? If you think about the processes before, and still many of them were based on batches. So if you lose the batch, then the transaction is going to come the next day. So you essentially lost a day and the transaction is going to be delayed. With cloud and APIs, we're enabling for these, 24/7 operations. That is not only because of the batches, it's also because of the operating hours of one institution in a country versus another institution in another country being different, or the time zone differences. You think about the payment from the US into Japan, that may be affected by a delay of a day because they almost don't have common opening hours and so on. So cloud and APIs are key into the transformation agenda. Now, let me come into the second trend I mentioned, which is about customer expectations, every time more demanding. And if you think about yourselves making maybe a payment, or making a purchase at Amazon, ordering something that arrives the same day and you have no delivery cost. And if you think then about yourself trying to get somewhere and ordering an Uber, that confirms the pickup, and then you can trace where the car is until it arrives to your destination. So very obvious examples, but that has raised your expectations. And for payments, everyone is expecting the same. Everyone is expecting the payment to be instant, the payment to be for free or very cheap. If not instant, to trace the money, how it moves. It feels crazy to think that we're able to trace how our package arrives home, and maybe we bought something that is worth 40 euro, and we cannot trace a payment of an invoice of 20,000, right? So we are expecting for the basics here. And also easy to use. If you think about the Amazon example, it took you 2 clicks to select the item and pay. So making a payment should be as simple as that. So customers more demanding, and that's originating a whole new set of payment options. So besides everything else that I just mentioned earlier, which is new players, we are seeing in the domestic payment space new options, like you may think about account-to-account kind of payments that are instant in your countries. So here in Italy, we have Bancomat Pay. In Spain, we have Bizum. In Poland, we have Blik. In Sweden, we have Swish, and so on. And those tend to be formed by a consortia of banks that got together to enable for this innovation. It is amazing because it not only tackled the aspect of instant for free, but it also tackled the aspect of ease of use. So you just select a phone number of the person you want to send the money to, and it's there. You don't need payment details, right? So the same expectation comes for cross-border payments, but we're not yet there. It's much more complicated. When you are orchestrating for this within a country, there's a handful of banks to align on that. When you're thinking on the international space and the 200 countries in the world and the different payment methods they already built, it becomes quite more complicated. But there's a lot of projects that are working into that direction. Other things that came as an innovation that raised the expectations in the domestic space are QR payments. So in Asia Pacific, paying with a QR is kind of the norm, and every country created their own QR mechanism. So if you think about Singapore, they have a QR method, and Malaysia have another one, but this is the way people pay. We see that in some European countries, maybe not so many. What we have here is more the NFC, the tap-to-pay optionality that is relying on the NFC technology underneath. So, yeah, customers raising the bar, and then the players, the financial players, trying to cope with it. Then the third trend is the regulation, and there you're much more experts than myself. But let me maybe tell you that the perspective of the financial players that are trying to cope with all these regulations, PSD3, PSR, instant payment regulation, MICA, DORA, FIDA, it's kind of overwhelming. And sometimes one wonders whether the innovation drives the need for regulation, or the regulation is really speeding up for the innovation. But it's great that we're having so much to work on and to innovate. And maybe let me focus on one of them, which I think is very important for the cross-border payments. So the instant payment regulation, which is now asking for payments to be instant, as defined as less than 10 seconds, also raising the bar very high. And not only instant, but no surcharge versus a non-instant payment, so they cannot be monetized from. And there's, of course, some security measures, like the verification of payee, that is mandating that the IBAN of the beneficiary and the account holder name are matching, and that this check is done before the money is gone, right? Things that we don't have today. And this is complicated for financial institutions, because some of them have it on a domestic basis, but in other countries it doesn't exist. And then having it on a European basis is something to be built, and yeah, quite exciting project, I would say. So besides regulators, what I see in this space is the supranational bodies, let me call them like that, being very active in cross-border payments. One example is the Financial Stability Board that was working with the G20 to create the targets to enhance cross-border payments. And these targets, if you're familiar with them, are calling for further speed. So 75% of the payments needs to be delivered within an hour, international payments. So that's pretty demanding. And the remaining 25% of the payments within a day. Now we have payments that are taking more than 2 days and 3 days. There's also a target with regards to the cost. So the cost of an international payment cannot exceed 1% of the transaction value. That means if the payment is 1,000, only 10 euro can be charged and no more than that. And the charge includes the fees and the FX markup if there's any. Again, something that is quite ambitious, because in average, the charges today, they vary by type of payment, but they tend to be higher than that. They're also calling for the need of transparency. So the cost of the payment, the delivery date, and the traceability of the payment need to be there, and so that the end user has all information at hand before making the payment. And accessibility is the fourth target. So the end users have the right to reach any payment option through electronic means. So these are targets the whole financial industry is working against, and they need to be met by 2027. Another example of what I call supranational bodies is the Bank of International Settlements that is innovating through their innovation hub, coming up with lots of projects and very good ideas that tackle cross-border payments. And I will highlight a couple of examples here. So one is called Project Nexus, and that intends to orchestrate remittances between different countries in an instant manner by connecting instant payment systems in a country with the instant payment system of another country, and at a lower cost versus today. Now, while some bilaterals exist today, like you may find it already between Singapore and Malaysia or Singapore and Thailand, that was built over the past few years. However, creating a multilateral mechanism that orchestrates for all of these is the scope here. And another project is called Agora, and that is slightly different, that intends to tackle wholesale payments and tokenized deposits and use blockchain as an underlying technology that would enable for that. So very exciting projects. Commercial banks and central banks may be part of them. We as SWIFT, we're also part of them, or are very interested to see the evolution. And then the last trend is about geopolitics. And this is a complicated one. But if you think about all the existing conflicts that exist today in between different countries, and some are very new, or the latent conflicts that are not there, but everyone knows this can happen at any time. They are influencing cross-border payments and the way the money flows from one country to another one. So there's a clear trend of deglobalization, which is exactly the opposite we saw in the past decades. That was, we were globalizing, now we're going backwards. And what we see is that some countries are looking after getting more in source within their country, but mostly it's about nearshoring or friendshoring, as some quote it. And the trade corridors are changing from one corridor into another one, right? This is what we are observing. The other effect is the de-dollarization. So lots of economies around the world were leaning on the US dollar, and now they're trying to use their local currency more and more. We see some of them, like the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan, they're growing share in the overall size of the international payments. And there's also some examples of regional networks that are being created. So PAPS, the Pan-African Payment System, intends to get the countries that belong to it, the usage of their domestic currencies when paying to each other. And the same happened in the Middle East with Buna. So that's a similar concept for Arab countries, as they call it. So a lot to watch out in this space as well. Now, these are the trends. This is the ecosystem. It's very fragmented, heterogeneous. It feels crazy if you think how it was in 2008. So now I would like to invite you to reflect on what does it all imply for the different type of players. And starting by the private sector, what does it mean for banks? What does it mean for FinTechs and all these new players that emerge? I think on one side, of course, banks need to be up to speed. They cannot lean on their old positioning of being an incumbent. They really need to modernize with these new technologies and options. But there's a lot of opportunities for partnerships in this space. So we're monitoring the partnerships, and there's a lot happening in terms of not only partnerships between banks and FinTechs, but also M&A. This is increasingly growing, and it's a way to tackle the opportunities of both worlds. When it comes to the public sector, so policymakers are having a hard time probably to cope up with all these new changes that I think on the one side is about understanding about the technology and what it enables for. But not only, I think the business model behind all these new realities is as important, if not more. Who's paying who, who's monetizing from what, how does it work from a commercial perspective? That's super important. And then for a player like us at SWIFT, we see a whole world of opportunities because we were born to interoperate banks between each other to send money from a bank account into another bank account. Now what we see is that there's a whole fragmentation of different players, different rails, and even different assets, right? If you think about it, it's the current money and the digital money. So we're having a lot of opportunities ahead to interoperate. And last, I would like to ask you, who do you think is the winner out of all of this? Any guess?
Any guess? I have a microphone for you. Any guess?
Well, I'm going to come with my own answer. I see you very shy. I think the winner is clearly the customer. And the customer is all of us as consumers and all businesses because they have a lot of new options. They can now choose, one tool to send money to their friend for paying for a little gift they did in between different people in different countries. They can choose another mechanism to send money to their family in case they are living abroad. They can use another one if they're paying a supplier, if they happen to be a company, and use another one when they travel, right? So there's a lot of options, but at the same time, I think there's the need to educate yourself, not to be overwhelmed. And so need for education is there, and need for being wise in selecting the right options that are offering secure payments. And that's also a shared responsibility between the users, ourselves, but also the policymakers to make sure they are enabled to judge that. Okay, so with this, I'm going to close here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. A big round of applause for Susana.